Helldivers, welcome to the channel. I'm your host Thumper, and in today's video, I will be ranking all of the armor buffs in Helldivers 2. Now, there's a lot of different armor buffs. We've got extra padding, we've got gas resistance, fire resistance, arc resistance. There's a bunch of different armor sets. I have a feeling you want to know what are the best and what are the worst. So in today's video, I will be ranking all of the armor buffs. And I'll be letting you know my personal opinions on how they work against Illuminate, Terminid, and Automatons. So if you'd like to see more content like this, please consider smashing that subscribe button down below. Now, what I should mention is I'm not ranking each individual armor. We can see here a whole list of all the individual armor. There's a boatload. And I'm not going to go into each single one because most of them carry the same buffs. Like these three here are all medic armor. We got another medic armor here, another medic armor here, another medic armor here. I'm not going to break into every single medic armor because at the end of the day, they all give you the same buff. It's an extra 2 stims. So there's no point in breaking in each individual armor buff. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about the armor buffs they have and how they go up against the enemies and which of the armor sets I like the best, whether it's light, medium, or heavy versions of that. So you can let me know your personal feelings about that in the comments. With that being said, let's head over to Helldivers and see what we're working with. Starting off, we have Scout Armor. Now, there's a lot of Scout Armor sets that you can run with light. We have the Arctic Ranger, we have Trailblazer Scout, we have Infiltrator, and I think that's all of them. So there's 3 scouting sets that I have. There might be more. I don't have all the armor sets in the game, I can tell you that, but I do have a decent amount of them at this point. I have basically all the buffs for every single set. So the way Scout Armor works, you can see I've moved my camera over to this side for you guys, and that's because you can actually read the buffs. Scout Armor will generate pings on the map every 2 seconds. It'll show like a little question mark on the map when you're running it, and it reduces range at which enemies can detect the wearer by 30%. To be honest, while I do think Scout Armor has its moments, it's mainly only good for minor places of interest. Because right now, to destroy automaton fabricators or to deal with bug holes, you're going to alert bugs. It's just a fact. You have to use explosives. You have to shoot them at bug holes. Unless you're playing with a squad. If you're playing with 4 people, or even 3 people, then it's not as big of a deal. Then you can run around with your Scout Armor, and what I find very effective for Scout Armor is to do minor places of interest. If you want to make your way around the map, and you want to collect all the samples and, you know, deal with all that little stuff, maybe get a small bug hole here and there with a 500, it's not a bad shout, and then just leave the area. That's kind of what I like Scout Armor for. The radar pings is very nice. I do actually really like that. You can ping the map and see little points of interest and other areas like the main objective if you're on a cloudy map. I do really like the Scout Armor. I don't think it's S tier, mainly because of the fact, especially when you're playing in higher difficulty, it's not as important to search the map. If you're playing on lower difficulties, yeah, I can see Scout Armor being super effective. But the higher you go in difficulty, I think the less effective Scout Armor is, in my opinion. Obviously, I know there's going to be some fans of it in the comments, and they can let me know how they personally feel. But for me, I'm going to give it a solid A tier. I don't think it's like S tier levels, but I do think it's a decent armor loadout, and if this is the kind of build you like running, it's not bad. Every now and then I'll use the Scout Armor set if I want to do a little sneaky breaky. After Scout Armor, we arrive to the Engineering Kit. Engineering gives 2 buffs. It gives you 30% recoil or 30% better recoil when crouched, which is really nice, and increases initial inventory and holding capacity of throwables by 2. This is huge. If you're using thermites, you only get 3 of them normally. So the fact that you can increase that to 5 is an absolutely massive buff. And now it takes from what is like 1 Titan you're able to take out to now 3. Especially because, as we all know, thermites are kind of goofy. They love to bounce off of Chargers and Hulks. They just go bing and bounce right off sometimes. I hope they fix that in the future. But yeah, Thermite's going to be a little annoying. So because of that, having an additional 2 nades to throw can definitely save your butt if you need them. It also reduces recoil, which again is great. Honestly, I think Engineering Kit is like S+ tier. This is one of the best armor sets in the game. Having 2 extra nades can be a lifesaver, whether you need Thermites to take out a Titan, whether you're using gas nades to deal with the Illuminate in hordes. This armor set is amazing. There's not a single enemy type that it struggles against. It's great for the automatons. As I said, if you're running thermites, you can take out tanks with it, which are huge. You can take out bot fabricators just by throwing it anywhere on the fabricator. You can even take out a factory strider just by throwing 2 thermites right underneath. And because of that, I almost always love running engineering kit against the automatons. Against the Terminid front, it's also great. You can throw 1 thermite on a charger or a gas nade or even a stun nade, and you'll easily deal with a bunch of things on you there. And when it comes to the Illuminate, the new gas nades or incendiary nades are incredible at just obliterating the voteless. So in general, engineering kit is huge and definitely a set that I would recommend to run. There's a couple different engineering kits as well in the light armor setting. We have Demolition Specialist and Breaker. I think Breaker is in the Superstore, and then Demolition Specialist is Democratic Detonations. So definitely would recommend to keep your eyes on that. But you do get a free Trench Engineer set just for completing Helldivers Mobilize. Most of the armor sets you do get for free in the first battle pass, which is pretty nice. It's only some of the more niche ones that you don't have access to. Moving on, we have the Servo Assisted buff. This gives you increased throwing range by 30% and 50% extra limb health. The limb health is nice, but I don't really care too much about it. I, used to not use too many stims, but nowadays I've learned that spamming stims really doesn't hurt that much. It takes a while to go through 4 stims, and if you lose a leg or something, you just use a stim. It's not that big of a deal. You throw down a resupply if you need more stims, or you're near a teammate and they'll give you a stim, and that's usually how it is for me most of the time. Because of that, the limb health doesn't really mean much to me, so really the only buff I'm looking at here is the increased throwing range by 30%. The throwing range is nice, I will be honest. Being able to throw nades a lot further, especially if you're throwing them at like automaton, turrets or something like that. Very, very solid. It's also great if you want to throw an orbital right inside of a factory or something that's a little further away. Great example is a detector tower. If you're throwing a orbital at a detector tower, sometimes maybe you don't want to get too close. Well, this is a very easy way to do that. Another great example of where I love the Legionnaire is, let's say I have a bunch of bugs chasing me or a bunch of something chasing me. I need stims or I need a resupply. Well, I can throw my resupply really far ahead of me, and then by the time I have caught up to where I've thrown the orbital, the resupply is usually just landing down, and it means that you don't have to worry about bugs or bots or anything being at the resupply, making it so you can't grab the supplies. So I do like the buff. In general, though, I don't find it being as big of a buff as something like the engineering kit, to be entirely honest, or some of the other armor sets, which we'll be talking about later. This is one of the lesser armors that I run. I definitely give it like a solid B tier. It has some great capabilities, and I know some of you are going to argue defiantly in the comments that you love it, and that's good. I'm not saying any of these armor sets are bad. There's only like a couple of them I'm going to point out which are like, you shouldn't run, but I don't think most of the armor sets are bad, and you can run what you like at the end of the day. I'm just sharing my opinions on what I use the most, what I don't use the most, especially because I'm a player that mainly only does level 10 difficulty. So, yeah, I'm going to say this is a solid B tier. Next up, we have the extra padding. Extra padding has 3 different categories. We have the light armor with extra padding. There's also some medium armor sets that do have extra padding, like the tactical here. And we also have heavy armor. One specific heavy armor that I'm aware of that has extra padding, which is the fortified commando. These are all interesting because what they do is they give you an additional armor rating, right? So normally light armor has a rating of 50, but with extra padding you get an additional 50 armor with 100. And your speed is still 550, the same as light armor. So essentially what extra padding does is it takes away the other buffs that you normally get, and in return gives you double the armor rating, or 50% extra if you're running like medium armor. As we can see, it goes from 100 to 150. It's mainly the best for light armor, if you ask me, because you're turning your light armor into medium armor without losing anything else. You're still just as fast. You still have the same stamina regen. This is actually a really, really good armor set. I used to run light armor an insane amount. There's a lot of times when you might think to yourself, gee, I'm so sick and tired of like dying from 2 hits from a small bug, or, getting your butt touched by a stalker. It's not just that, though. When you're fighting automatons, it's very common that sometimes you'll just get unlucky and an automaton will hit you with all their shots. How many times does a heavy dev just go and blast your brains out? Having that additional 50 armor is huge. It's really nice, and because of that, I do like the extra padding. I'm going to give this an A tier. I don't think it's anything insane, but I do think that it's a fun armor set to run, and it's one that I was running a lot when I was starting off. It was very, very nice. We obviously have more scout armor, don't care too much about that. Here, now we have the Noxus Ranger. Looks very similar, honestly, to the Legionaire, just a little bit different in design. The Noxus Ranger, it's got a buff, 80% resistance to gas damage and effects. If I'm going to be entirely honest, this is one of the most pointless buffs in the game. Yes, if you're using gas nades like I do, occasionally it's nice to throw down the gas, stand in the gas, and then use a stim after you've like lost a little bit of health and you like don't ever die. And it's nice. If you ever have a bunch of bugs coming after you, you can throw down the gas nades and then complete the objective or get on the terminal and not really have to worry about it. But at the same time, I just don't really see it being that effective, like, ever. If it had, like, an additional buff, it would be nice, but I don't know. I just don't really see gas resistance being that important, especially when we have this armor set, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. But yeah, personally, I think the gas armor is the worst armor in the game. And maybe somebody's going to disagree with me, but I really feel like this one has the lowest buff. If I run in the gas, I just use a stim. That's all it is. When I'm using gas nades, if I get low on health, I just stim, and then it's not a problem. Gas isn't like fire. It doesn't insta-nuke you, so there's really not much of a problem there. Just pay attention to where the gas is, and not many people are running gas to begin with, so it's just not much of an issue if you ask me. So yeah, I'm going to give this like a solid C tier to D tier on the armor scale. We also have the new armor, well, not the newest, but some of the newer, by Truth Enforcers, and this has the unflinching effect. This is preventing Helldivers from flinching when hit. It's nice. I mean, I won't lie, especially when I'm dealing with, like, bots, for example, and, you know, it's very common when you're dealing with bots, or the Illuminate now, which have their long-ranged weapons, to get shot, and it'll mess your shot up, especially if you're using a weapon like a Quasar, for example. It's very annoying when you're charging a Quasar, and then you get shot, and it stumbles you right when you charge that shot up, and then it misses whatever Titan or whatever it is. It's nice that you don't flinch. At the same time, that's the only buff you get. It's really not that big of a buff. Maybe if it was on heavy armor, I'd like it. Right now, all we have is medium armor and light armor that gives you this buff. And I will say, it's the nicest looking armor sets in the game, in my opinion. And I do run it because they look nice. But in terms of the buff, I don't really notice it all that often. I'm not really putting myself in harm's way most of the time, or I'm not trying to constantly be hit. This only really helps you if you are being constantly hit. And the problem is it's light armor, so if you're getting hit, you're dying. It's all right. I'd give it like a solid C tier. That's where I'm going to put it in C tier. I don't really see much of a reason to run this armor set, and I've honestly almost never seen anybody running this armor set. It's most effective against bots, but the problem is I'd just rather run explosion resistance or extra grenades, extra stims against bots, because they'll give me much more survivability. But you can let me know your personal feelings about the unflinching in the comments. Now we arrive to the Siege Ready buff, and this is S+ tier. This increases reload speed of primary weapons by 30% and increases ammo capacity of primary weapons by 20%. Right now, it's not just primary weapons. If you're also running support weapons, it'll give you an extra mag. If you're running secondaries, it'll give you an extra mag. I'm not sure if Arrowhead is going to buff this or change this, or nerf it, should I say, in the future. I would assume so, because what it says here is not what it's supposed to do, so I guess we'll see if that gets changed. But even if it does get changed, the 30% faster reload speed of primary weapons and 20% extra ammo is a huge buff, because it takes weapons that normally are rather mediocre due to their ammo size capacity and actually makes them a lot better. A great example of this is the Scorcher. Scorcher blows through ammo insanely fast and is very annoying because of that. So being able to reload faster and hold 20% more ammo, which is an extra mag, feels absolutely great. The crossbow, it has quite a long reload, and it's great that you can make that reload a lot faster just by running the armor set. It's weapons like the Breaker or the Breaker Incendiary, which normally only has 4 magazines. It's a huge buff. It is by far my most used armor set after the changes. It is insane. It's great against Terminids. It's great against Illuminate. It's great against the Automatons. And when you have an armor set that's great against everything, it's just super, super solid. So definitely one of the major sets I would recommend to run. If you don't have the Urban Legends Warbond, it is basically the best Warbond in the game, if you ask my personal opinion, right up there next to Democratic Detonation. Next up, we have the PH9 Predator. This increases melee damage by 100% and improves weapon handling with less drag on weapon movement. Essentially what that means is normally when you're aiming, you know, this is your reticle here, and then you have like your crosshair behind the reticle. Normally, it's a little delayed like this, but with the peak physique buff, it's more like that. Like, it follows exactly where you aim, and that's really nice, because it means that you have to spend less time lining up your shot. This is especially nice when you're using larger support weapons, like the recoilless rifle, the Quasar, or the EAT, and you want to get a perfect shot on maybe a Factory Strider's little eyeball to one-shot it with the recoilless. These are all things that are very, very nice, but also not amazing, to be entirely honest. I kind of look at the peak physique buff kind of like the Inspector, where it's unflinching, and it's all right. The melee damage is nice. I know some of you out there are diehard melee fans, and the new Basher and Lance are great with the melee damage, but at the same time, I tried doing a melee-only video about a week ago, and I had to give up because it wasn't possible. Maybe in lower difficulty it is, but in higher difficulty, it's not possible to do melee only, mainly down to the fact that, like, the moment one charger spawns, you just die. The moment that anything spawns in groups, you get overrun and die. Obviously, you can't do melee at all, really, against bots, because they have guns. And the Illuminate, you can do melee until you go up against a jetpack or a harvester. So, because of that, I don't love the peak physique. I know that some of you in the comments are going to say it's really nice. Don't get me wrong, the weapon handling is a big buff. But at the same time, I can run engineering armor, and I can crouch and get 30% better recoil, which at the same time is a really nice buff as well. I do like peak physique. I'm going to give it a B tier, is where it's going to go. Like, it's not bad. It's definitely better than unflinching. But at the same time, I really don't think the buffs are enough to make it worthy, in my opinion. But you can let me know in the comments. We have the Inflammable armor, which gives you a 75% damage resistance to fire. This is great. Honestly, this is like A-tier armor. Mainly, I would say, effective against bugs. Obviously, fire against bots. It's not terrible, but I don't really see much of a reason to use fire against bots. But when you're up against bugs, it is very common to run into fire tornadoes, depending on what map you're on. Not only that, but it's very common that one of your teammates will run a flamethrower, an orbital napalm barrage. Something that involves fire is very common when it comes to the Terminid front. It's also not uncommon to see in the Illuminid front. And because of that, I do end up running the Heat Seeker, and I also end up running the medium armor, which is the Firefighter, quite often. It's a very, very nice buff, and the major reason why I love it so much is because I can run a flamethrower like the Torture and not have to worry about burning myself alive. It's a solid A-tier armor set. It doesn't make it higher because this armor set exists, which is the Acclaimed buff. This is the Killzone armor set. Everybody that's been playing Helldivers for the past couple months got this for absolutely free just by logging into the game. It gives 50% resistance to fire, gas, acid, and electrical damage. Now, I think both of these armor sets are really only useful against the Terminid front. The Obedient is slightly better against the Illuminate, mainly due to the arc resistance, the electrical damage. 50% means that a harvester won't kill you. But at the same time, we do have arc armor, which is a 95% arc resistance. And at that point, if you're going up against Illuminate, just use that, because you're not going to be dealing with fire, gas, or acid on the Illuminate unless you're using like a flamethrower. But when it comes to the Terminid front, the Heat Seeker, while it's good, the Acclaimed buff is like S+ tier. It's the only armor in the game that has acid resistance right now. We have gas resistance, but it's not the same as acid. Acid is what the nursing spewers shoot at you, and it's what the titans shoot at you. And that resistance means that now, even if you are a little bit in the direct fire of a nursing spewer or a titan, you still might not die if you jump out of the way and use a stim. Especially because there's also a medium Killzone armor buff. I hope that they add a heavy one at some point because, oh man, heavy armor paired with this buff would be huge. But yes, I think the Acclaimed buff is by far the best buff overall when it comes to the Terminid front. I'm running this armor almost every time. Obedient and Street Scout are like the two light armors I'm running against the Terminid front right now. I do like the nades. The nades are great, but I'm not running it too much as of now. I'm not sure if there is a light armor which has the Medkit ability. There probably is, but I don't have it on this account yet. But I do have some medium armor with the Medkit ability. And we obviously have servo assisted here. Most of the buffs we've already talked about. However, there's two buffs we haven't talked about so far on the medium armor. Actually, three. But let's start off with the Democracy Protects. This is another S+ armor set. If you're fighting Illuminate, if you're fighting Terminid or Automaton, this is an insane armor set. It gives you a 50% chance to not die. That's it. Flip a coin. There you go. If you flip the coin on heads, now you're not going to die from lethal damage. So you can literally, I don't know, accidentally orbital yourself with a precision strike, and if that 50% goes off, you won't die. That's huge. That means if you lost, let's say you died 5 times in a level 10 mission. If you were running this armor set, on average, 2 of those deaths might not have occurred. Or 3 of those deaths might not have occurred. All 5 of them might not have occurred if you roll 50% each time, which is huge. Like, this is a huge armor set. If you're a beginner and you're learning how to play this game, Democracy Protects is like the best buff you can run, because if you make mistakes, you might just be saved. And not only that, it also prevents all bleeding damage if your chest hemorrhages. Bleeding damage isn't a huge thing, but occasionally there will be a moment when you get knocked down to like 20% health and you notice that your chest is hemorrhaging. And then you'll notice, uh-oh, I don't have any stims, and you slowly bleed out. It sucks, and I've had it happen. It doesn't happen often, but it does. And this is a huge buff. The 50%, it's only on medium armor to what I'm aware. I don't think there's actually any heavy armor that has this buff, but like, who cares? The 50% buff, I wish there was a light armor set that had it, because I would be running it, or maybe there is one, somebody can let me know in the comments, but I don't have access to it. But yeah, Democracy Protects is huge. There's a bunch of different armor sets as well in the medium area that has this. I think there's like 3 in total. But yeah, Democracy Protects is huge, and you should be running it. I'm pretty sure almost everybody has access to it as well. For free, which is pretty dang sweet. So, yeah. With that being said, we then arrive to the next buff, which is the Medkit. Medkit gives an additional 2 stims and increases stim effect duration by 2 seconds. S tier. Like, easy. This is just as good as the Engineer set. This is the best survivability armor in the game. Yeah, I know the 50% is huge, but, like, you don't need to worry about dying with this armor set. You spawn with 6 stims, and the stims last longer, so it's huge. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll spawn in when I'm using the Medkit armor, and I'll have, you know, a bunch of things just absolutely touching me, and I just keep spamming stims over and over and over. 6 stims, if they last, let's say you need a stim every minute, right? Or maybe even every 30 seconds. With 6 stims, that means you can literally have 2 minutes of stims. That's a huge amount of time. And if it's a minute per stim, then that means you have 6 minutes worth of stims, and obviously it resupplies every 2 minutes. Like, you can easily outlast almost anything on you, as long as you're not getting murdered by, like, an insta-kill. The Medkit bonus is huge, especially with that extra 2-second stim effect duration. If you pair that with the stim booster, which gives you an additional increased movement speed and damage reduction, it's like a massive buff. Definitely one of the best armor sets. Again, if you're a beginner and you want survivability, this is a really, really good shout. There's a bunch of them as well. You can literally get the Alpha Commander for free just by downloading the DLC. I'm not sure if it's still available, but it was available at one point for free, which is pretty dang sweet, by just clicking on the Steam Awards tab, which is pretty dang cool. We have the electrical conduit buff. I think there's a light armor that has this as well. I know there's a heavy armor. I don't have the Warbond fully done yet. If we go to the is it Steel Veterans? No, it's Cutting Edge. In Cutting Edge we have, yeah, here it is, the light armor. This one's 95% resistance. Actually, I can get it right now. There you go. And then there's also the heavy armor, which also gives you arc resistance. I've been getting like the final things on my Warbonds unlocked. I have almost every single thing now in every Warbond, and I've just been trying to get like the final things here and there, as we can see. But you know, these buffs I already have on certain armor sets. But the arc resistance armor is a big buff, and it's really only useful for 2 reasons. The first is that you're playing with a noob, and he's your friend, and you know he's going to run an arc thrower or an arc tower, and you don't want to die. That's the first reason. The second reason why you'd run this is currently the Illuminate Harvesters and little Arc Towers spawn. Harvesters, if you walk up to them, will zap you. That's how they kill you. They don't have like a stomp effect on the ground. They just zap you. So to deal with that, you can run this, and there you go. Now, the Harvesters really can't do anything. If you pair this with a Thermite, one Thermite to a joint takes out a Harvester. It's a huge, huge capability. Not only that, but it's actually a pretty cool-looking armor set, personally. I think it looks really, really nice. Oh, actually, it's not a light armor set. Well, I guess, I don't know where I got the X. I guess they just give you 2 medium sets. Either way, the arc resistance is very nice. But at the same time, the only reason you're going to use this is either trash teammates or Illuminate. Apart from that, it's not good against the bot front. It's no reason to use against the, really no reason against the Terminids either. So S tier for the Illuminate, and then like C tier to D tier for the other 2 fronts. There's really no reason to run it. Apart from that, that's basically all the buffs to talk about, apart from one, the Enforcer. This is a huge buff. And I think this is the only medium armor set I have with this buff right now. Yeah, it is. So the way Enforcer works, or should I say the fortified buff, is it reduces recoil when crouching or prone by 30%. So the same as the basically the same as the engineering. But what it also gives you is 50% resistance to explosive damage. Now this isn't that important against Illuminate, unless you're constantly getting killed by nades, but that really shouldn't be a problem. It's pretty useless against the Terminids, but the best bot armor. Like, you need explosion resistance for bots. I've gone through all the armor sets, and don't get me wrong, extra nades are great against bots, as I mentioned, and obviously Street Scout is amazing against bots. There are some very solid kits which you can use against bots, but 50% reduced explosion damage is literally insane, because all the bots shoot is explosion. The Hulks have rockets. The Devs have rockets. The Striders have missiles, which, if you're not running this, will one-shot you. The tanks shoot explosions. The turrets shoot explosions. There are... everything shoots explosions on bots. And running this, paired with a shield gen, will basically make you feel invincible. Yeah, you'll get flung around like a ragdoll, but it doesn't really matter if you're not dying. And that's why when I'm fighting against the bots, I'm almost always running either the Enforcer or some sort of heavy armor, which gives me explosion resistance, like the Marksman. It's just kind of mandatory, so that's what I will say. Apart from that, I think we've basically gone over all the armor. I mean, we do have higher armor rating for the medium and heavy sets, which obviously are their own respective buffs, but yeah, that's basically it. That is all of the buffs, ladies and gentlemen. If you want my opinion on each class, like when should you run the light armor variants, the medium armor variant, or the heavy armor variants, well, we can start off with the heavy armor variants really quickly. When you're going up against bots, personally, I think the heavy armor is the best way to go for explosion resistance, just because you are an absolute tank. When it comes to the 30% reload speed and 20% better ammo capacity, against the Terminids, I would highly recommend to run the light armor, just because it's easier to run away from the bugs and use that reload speed to your effect. If you're going up against the Illuminate or the bots, I'd recommend to run the heavy armor. With heavy armor, you can actually survive a Strider missile, which is kind of huge. So, yeah, the heavy armor is the way to go. When it comes to the flamethrowers, I would recommend the heavy armor or medium before the light armor for the Terminids, and the major reason why is because a lot of the times when you're using a flamethrower, bugs will still be able to get a hit off through the fire onto you. And because of that, I'd rather be able to survive that hit and keep torching and just use a stim than be at like 2 health and die from the fire or something like that. So I do like the Salamander, and I do also really like the Firefighter versus the light armor. But I do like the light armor as well. We have the heavy nade armor versus the medium and the light. Honestly, I think all three are great. I think the heavy armor, again, is best against bots. I would run the light armor against the Illuminids and the Terminids. It's great, and you're going to be able to run around and throw nades, especially for the medium armor as well. Extra padding is less effective for medium and heavy armor because it only gives you a 50% buff. Actually, it's only a 25% buff for the heavy armor, and it's a 50% buff for the medium, but a double buff for the light. It goes from 50 armor to 100. So running the extra padding is really most effective on light armor, if you ask me. That's when I'd most likely be running it. And apart from that, that's really about it. I mean, obviously we have like the Acclaimed buff, which I think is huge, but yeah, that's all the armor and all the buffs that exist in the game, to at least when I'm aware. So as always, if you enjoy this type of content, let me know. And if you learned a thing or two about today's video, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.